In the frozen dawn of Normandy's Hedgerow country, where the summer mist clung low and every shadow carried the threat of sudden death, a single Sherman tank sat half buried in mud, silent, waiting, hunted. Inside, four exhausted American crewmen argued in whispers. Except for one, a young loader named Eli Parker, clutching a small metal object the others called ridiculous. It was nothing more than a salvaged truck maker mirror, bolted to the turret wall with scavenged screws. He swore it would save their lives. The others laughed until the morning German steel came for them, and Eli's strange invention became the eyes that turned an ordinary Sherman into a predator. Before the sun was fully up, 3 German Panthers lay burning in the hedgerows, destroyed in less than 4 minutes. And the men who had once mocked the mirror would never laugh at Eli Parker again. Eli Parker had never intended to become a soldier, let alone a tank crewman. Before the war, he had been a quiet farm kid from Ohio who liked to fix things more than he liked to talk. He understood machines the way some people understood music, instinctively, almost spiritually. He could feel problems before he could explain them. But when the world began tearing itself apart and his older brother left for the Pacific, Eli enlisted too, telling his mother he couldn't sit at home while others did the fighting. He never admitted he was terrified of not being brave enough. That fear stayed with him across the Atlantic, onto the beaches of France, and finally into the cramped steel belly of a Sherman tank, where oil fumes and sweat mixed with the constant thump of his racing heartbeat. The loader's job was simple: feed shells, keep the gun alive, pray the enemy didn't hit first. But from the first week in combat, Eli felt a deeper dread, one he struggled to put into words. The Sherman was fast, reliable, and beloved by many crews. But in the hedgerow maze of Normandy, it had one cruel weakness. It couldn't see German Panthers and Panzers hid behind walls of green, waiting to ambush. You didn't fight them. You stumbled into them, and for a loader, that meant one mistake, one blind turn, one fraction of a second too slow, and the entire crew could vanish in an inferno of armor-piercing fire. Eli couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night while the others slept, he stared at the dark interior walls of the tank, imagining ways to see around corners, ways to give them one more second to act. Most crews accepted this blindness as fate. Eli didn't. His mind raced while his hands moved automatically, checking shells, stacking HE and AP rounds, memorizing where each type sat so he could load by touch in darkness or panic. But behind the routine, an idea began to grow. If they couldn't see the enemy, maybe they could see the movement before it happened. Maybe just a glimpse of turret motion, a shifting reflection, a sliver of light bouncing from armor could warn them before it was too late. The idea came to him the day they passed a wrecked supply truck and he saw a shattered side mirror lying in the mud. He picked it up without thinking, wiping off the grime, turning it in his hands as if the metal itself whispered instructions. It was curved just enough to catch broad angles, durable enough to survive vibration, and small enough to mount inside the tank without blocking the loader's space. It was nothing special, just a mirror. But in Eli's mind, it was a new sense, a second set of eyes where none had existed, a warning system that didn't depend on luck or prayer. He carried it back to camp like contraband and found the perfect place inside the Sherman's turret, an angle where the mirror could catch movement through the commander's periscope and bounce it directly to his position, a way for the loader, the least senior man in the crew, to see something before the commander or gunner did. When he told the others, they burst out laughing. Not cruel laughter, just weary soldiers laughing at a kid who thought he could out-invent the war. Their commander, Lieutenant Hale, patted him on the shoulder and told him it was a fine farm boy idea, which was the polite way of saying pointless. Eli said nothing. The mirror stayed. Days later, as they crawled through the narrow Norman lanes with hedges towering on both sides like green fortress walls, Eli kept watching his improvised mirror. It showed nothing. Until the morning the air shifted, a faint glint, a movement too smooth to be leaves. Eli felt his stomach drop. In that split instant, he realized what it meant. A Panther turret was turning toward them. His voice cracked as he shouted the warning. The crew froze, then erupted into motion. The guns swung, the driver hit reverse, and before the German gunners could finish lining up their shot, the Sherman's cannon thundered. Eli didn't think. He simply loaded. Steel slammed into steel, recoil hammered the turret ring, smoke choked the air, and outside, the Panther vanished behind a sheet of flame. The others stared at Eli, adrenaline shaking through them, their faces pale with the understanding of what almost happened, and what had saved them. But there was no time to speak, no time to breathe. The mirror caught another glint. Two more Panthers were closing in. What happened in those next moments would later be described in reports as rapid engagement under extreme duress. But those cold words could never capture what Eli felt inside that steel coffin. To him, time didn't slow down. It snapped into fragments, each one sharp enough to cut. The first Panther's death roar still echoed through the hedgerows when he saw a new flicker in the mirror, a faint ripple of motion reflected from the commander's periscope. It wasn't light this time. It was shadow. Something big was shifting behind a wall of foliage, something that moved with the mechanical certainty of a predator, adjusting its aim. Eli's voice cracked again as he shouted, "Right side! Turret moving on us!" His crew didn't question him now. They had seen what his warning meant. Lieutenant Hale swung the turret so fast the gears screamed, while the driver slammed the controls backward, ripping the Sherman out of its previous firing line. The tank lurched, throwing Eli against the ammo racks, but he stayed focused. The gunner, McGrath, pressed his face to the sights, hunting for a target that refused to show itself. Panthers weren't just armored. They were clever. They used hedgerows as shields, revealing only the tip of their long gun barrel in the moments before they fired. The Sherman crew had seconds, maybe less. And all they had was Eli's mirror, vibrating from the engine's roar, reflecting nothing but tremors and half-formed shapes. Then a thunderclap tore through the leaves. Dirt exploded to their left as a Panther round smashed into the ground, missing the Sherman's hull by inches. The entire tank rattled like it had been punched by a god. Eli's throat tasted like copper. If that round had hit center mass, they wouldn't be shouting or fighting, they'd be ashes. But the miss meant one thing: the Panther had revealed its position. McGrath fired before Hale even finished giving the order. Eli slammed another shell into the breach, the hot metal burning his gloves, his arms moving faster than his mind. The recoil hammered his ribcage. Through the smoke, McGrath called out, voice showing again, "Hit, but not enough!" The Panther was wounded, not dead. Its silhouette limped back into cover, trying to reposition for another shot. That's when Eli felt the tank shift beneath his feet. The driver was pushing forward, not retreating. Hale wasn't giving the enemy room to breathe. Their only chance was aggression, speed, and the element of surprise. Panther crews expected Shermans to run. This one didn't. Eli felt a fierce, unfamiliar fire inside him. They were no longer victims of the close-range and ambush game. They were breaking it, but danger was tightening around them. As they closed on the wounded Panther, the mirror flashed again. This time brighter, harsher. Another turret, another glint of steel. A third Panther was flanking, moving into position to finish the bold Sherman that had dared to fight back. Eli shouted the warning so loudly his voice cracked, but Hale didn't flinch. Instead, he made a decision so insane it bordered on divine instinct. He ordered the driver to angle the Sherman between the two Panthers, forcing them into a crossfire where each shot meant exposing themselves. They weren't attacking one enemy. They were disrupting the rhythm of three. McGrath fired again, and the wounded Panther finally erupted, flames punching through its hull. Eli didn't see it. His world was the mirror, and the mirror showed death closing in. The third Panther had committed, its guns swinging toward them, its commander rising from the hatch to direct fire. Before he could finish, McGrath's shot tore through the enemy turret and sent the commander tumbling like a rag doll. Eli reloaded with shaking hands, sweat dripping into his eyes, breath burning his lungs. The Sherman's engine howled, the turret roared, the hedgerows shook with the concussion of each blast, and through the swirling smoke, Eli felt as if the world had shrunk to just two things: steel and survival. Then he saw it, one last shape in the mirror. The second Panther, the one that had been maneuvering, had overextended. Its gun barrel was exposed. Its turret was too slow to finish its turn. It had revealed its weakness for a fraction of a second. Eli didn't even shout this time. He just pointed, and McGrath understood. The Sherman fired its final shot of that terrible, miraculous 4-minute storm. And then, silence, broken only by the crackling of the burning German armor and the ragged breathing of 4 Americans who couldn't quite believe they were still alive. 3 Panthers destroyed. 1 Sherman standing, smoking, dented, bruised, but alive. And in the flickering reflection of a cheap metal mirror, Eli saw the truth in the eyes of his crew. They were alive because he refused to accept blindness as fate. And now, for the first time, the men who fought beside him looked at Eli Parker, not as a quiet farm boy, not as a kid, but as the man who had seen death coming and dared to stop it. When the firing stopped, the silence felt unnatural, too clean, too empty after the chaos that had nearly torn them apart. Eli remained frozen in place, one hand still gripping a shell he no longer needed, the other trembling against the turret wall. Smoke drifted through the hatch. The smell of burning oil and scorched metal poured into the Sherman like a reminder. Life and death were separated by inches, decisions, and the fragile choices of ordinary men. Outside, the hedgerows flickered orange from the burning Panthers, their flames popping like wood in a fireplace, a sound that would follow Eli in his dreams for years. Lieutenant Hale was the first to speak, though his voice came low, hoarse, as if dragged from somewhere deep. "Parker, you saved all of us." Eli didn't respond. He stared down at his hands, noticing the blisters on his palms, the soot embedded under his fingernails, the tremor he couldn't make stop. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had just survived a storm he should never have lived through. McGrath, the gunner, reached out and squeezed Eli's shoulder once, a silent acknowledgement between men who had witnessed each other's fear and held steady anyway. But war never leaves space for reflection. Before they could even step out to inspect the damage, the radio crackled with a panicked message. German reinforcements had been spotted moving toward their sector. The Panthers they'd destroyed were only the vanguard of a larger armored push. Their unit was being ordered to fall back, regroup, and hold a new line. The Sherman's engine still ran, but barely. The fight had shaken the hull so violently that every bolt and weld felt ready to snap. They had minutes to move before the next wave crashed over them. As the tank rattled down the narrow lane, Eli felt every vibration like a memory he was trying to escape. But the truth pressed harder than the engine's hum. If he hadn't insisted on installing that mirror, if he hadn't trusted his instincts, if he hadn't spoken up at the exact second he did, his friends would have died. He would have died. Survivors in war carry 2 weights, the gratitude of living and the burden of knowing why. The others looked at him with a new kind of respect, but Eli felt something heavier settle in his chest. Responsibility. Not for glory, for the fact that his mind, restless and frightened as it was, had saved men who had families waiting to hear their voices. Again, hours later, they reached the fallback point, an orchard transformed into a temporary motor pool. Mechanics swarmed the Sherman, clambering over its battered armor, murmuring in disbelief at the damage it had endured. Word of the 3 Panther kills spread fast, carried by adrenaline and awe. Crews from other tanks came to see the lucky Sherman and the miracle shot team. But it wasn't luck. Hale knew it. McGrath knew it. The driver, Jennings, knew it. And slowly the truth whispered through the orchard. The youngest member of the crew, the quiet loader with the farm boy manner and the unusual mirror, had been the one who turned the tide. A staff officer arrived before sundown, demanding a full report. Hale recounted the engagement row, but when he reached the part about the warning system, the officer frowned. "A mirror? Inside the turret?" He spoke the words like they were beneath military doctrine, too crude to matter. Eli's shoulders tightened. Here it was again, the dismissal, the instinctive disbelief that anything simple could change the brutal mechanics of war. But Hale didn't back down. "That mirror gave us seconds we wouldn't have had. Seconds that saved 4 American lives and destroyed 3 German tanks." His voice carried a sharpness that silenced the orchard. The officer scribbled notes but didn't argue. He understood. Everyone did. Later, when night fell and the sounds of distant shelling rumbled across the horizon, Eli sat alone on an ammunition crate, staring at the scrap metal mirror he had unscrewed from the turret before the mechanics began repairs. It was dented now from the shockwaves, its frame slightly bent, but the glass still caught reflections from the nearby campfires. He turned it slowly in his hands. The men who had mocked it were now alive because of it. The device that had seemed ridiculous had become a lifeline. But Eli's thoughts weren't on pride. They were on the terrifying awareness that innovation isn't born from brilliance alone. It's born from fear, from desperation, from the quiet refusal to accept that this is just how things are. He wondered how many other small ideas had been ignored in this war, how many tiny sparks of survival had been dismissed because they didn't look like heroism. The orchard lights dimmed, the night grew colder, and somewhere beyond the hedgerows, engines growled in the dark, reminding Eli that his invention had bought them time, but not safety. The war would demand more from him, from all of them, and the next test would come sooner than any of them were ready for. Dawn broke with an eerie stillness, the kind that feels less like peace and more like the world holding its breath. The orchard lay wrapped in pale light, and the Sherman, still scorched, still dented, looked like an exhausted prize fighter forced back into the ring. Mechanics had worked through the night, patching the armor with welded plates, tightening rattling bolts, coaxing life back into the wounded machine. And Eli barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes, turrets turning, smoke pouring, shadows shifting in his mirror. Survival replayed itself like an unfinished thought. He kept wondering, was it skill? Was it instinct? Or was it just the thin margin of luck that every soldier fears will run out? There was no time to dwell. At first light, Hale gathered the crew around the tank and delivered the new orders. The Germans were building pressure along the sector, pushing hard to reclaim ground lost after D-Day. Armored columns were threading their way through the hedgerows, testing for weak spots. And their unit had been assigned a brutal task: hold a crossroads that would either slow the enemy's advance or let it pour straight into the American flank. Hale spoke plainly, his voice steady but edged with fatigue. "We're going back in, and we'll be outnumbered." A long silence followed. The words hung like frost in the air. Eli's stomach twisted. The mirror had saved them once, but now everyone expected it would do so again. The idea scared him more than German armor ever could. He knew that expectations could crush a man, that the moment something extraordinary happened, the world stopped seeing you as ordinary. But Eli didn't feel like a miracle worker. He felt like a kid trapped between steel plates, trying to outthink machines designed to kill him. Yet when he climbed back into the turret, his hands found their familiar places. The breech, the ammo racks, the small metal bracket he had built for the mirror. This time he mounted it with steadier fingers. McGrath tapped the frame with a knuckle and nodded him. No jokes, no half smiles, just trust. It weighed more than Eli wanted to admit. As they rolled out of the orchard, the countryside didn't look like Normandy anymore. It looked like a throat closing around them. The hedgerows felt taller, thicker, hungrier. The roads were narrow, winding channels of mud carved between walls of green, and the heat already pressed through the Sherman's armor like a warning. The tank rattled forward, its engine groaning, its crew braced for the unseen. Every few minutes, someone murmured a direction, a distance, a possible sound, but Eli barely heard them. His senses were tuned entirely to the mirror, the small, simple device that had become their shield and burden. By the time they reached the crossroads, smoke was already drifting across the fields. The remains of a half-track burned on the left side of the junction, the skeleton of its engine block still popping from trapped heat. Dozens of infantrymen were dug in along the ditch line, nervous, muddy, exhausted. When the Sherman arrived, they looked at it with the kind of desperate hope reserved for lifeboats and miracles. "They've got armor coming," one sergeant warned. "Big ones, Panthers, maybe Tigers." Hale acknowledged him with a grim nod. The crew knew what that meant. They were being positioned as the anchor of the defense. If the tank failed, the line would collapse. Eli felt the pressure building in his chest, rising like a tide that threatened to choke him. He looked down at the mirror, so small, so fragile, and wondered how something that fit in his hand had become the thing everyone leaned on. They set the Sherman behind a cluster of hedgerows that offered partial cover, giving Hale a narrow window to fire through without exposing the entire tank. The minutes dragged like hours. The sun climbed. Sweat soaked their clothes. Every creak of the turret felt loud. Every distant rumble of engines, real or imagined, sent a jolt through the crew. Eli kept scanning the mirror, watching for movement, glints, anything. Then he saw it. A shape. Not a flash this time, but a distortion. Like the hedgerow had shrugged for a moment, Eli's heart seized. He leaned closer, his breath fogging in the mirror. The shape grew, hardened, formed itself into a silhouette he recognized instantly. A German turret easing into view, trying to angle for a kill shot. He shouted the warning. Hale reacted on instinct. The gun swung. The driver jolted forward. McGrath locked onto the target. But this time the Panther fired first. The blast ripped through the hedgerow, shredding leaves and dirt in a violent spray. It slammed against the Sherman's added armor plate with a deafening shriek of metal. Enough force to shove the tank backward on its tracks. Eli's ears rang. He tasted blood. The mirror rattled so violently he thought it would fall off. But when the smoke cleared, they were still alive. Barely. Eli forced the next shell into the breach, his hands numb, his arms burning. McGrath fired. The recoil sent a shock through their spines. The Panther staggered from the hit but didn't fall. It backed into the foliage, hunting for a new angle. And suddenly Eli realized the truth that chilled him deeper than fear. The Germans were no longer underestimating them. They were targeting them, learning from them, adapting to the very innovation that had once given the crew their edge. The mirror had made them dangerous. Now it made them a priority.